Welcome once again, everyone, to the Think Clinical podcast. My name is Hamza. Thank you so much for all you do for this channel. Continue to share, like, and subscribe. We have another exciting conversation today, and it's going to be centered around just identifying red flags that point to the fact that your business or your healthcare business probably could be collapsing or could be in trouble, and at the point where you need to really pay attention to what needs to be done, either closing it or finding other forms of ways to sustain your business. But I'm only going to walk through 3 of these, and hopefully at the end of everything we should be able to kind of walk through some psychological concepts that really delude us into the fact that into believing that we are on course when we are actually not, and that just that makes the loss even worse than it's supposed to be. So stay tuned, and this is going to be another exciting episode. Hopefully we'll be able to walk through these and clarify them as much as we can. The first red flag you need to look out for is when you have an unsustainable operational cost. Now, when you run a business, you need to be able to make enough money to cover your operational cost. That is non-negotiable. You cannot run a business that is losing more money than it's making. But consistently, we've seen situations where people are running businesses and their expenses are just outpacing their revenue, and they keep going. Now, this is, in the long term, you are going to close down this business eventually, because if you do not take the time to sit back and say, why am I having all these challenges right now, then you are not going to be able to keep your business going. So the first red flag, which should draw attention to something possibly wrong, is when you see that consistently your expenses are outpacing your revenue. Then you need to sit back and say, what am I getting wrong? What am I doing wrong? How can I turn this around? And if there's absolutely no way you can turn it around, you need to seriously have an objective conversation with yourself. The second thing we need to pay attention to is when you have inadequate market demand for the product or the services you bring in. So we've gone through so many ways and so many preparatory items you need to put in place before you come into the market. But just maybe you thought there was a market demand for the product and the service you were bringing in, but after you launch your product, you realize that there's absolutely no demand, or the demand is not as high as you thought it was going to be. So your projections are completely out of place. That might be another time for you to either pivot or think about other ways around the business. And again, you should always pay attention to the fact that closing down your business could also be one of the best decisions you ever make for your financial health, whatever, and emotional and psychological health. So anytime you're starting a business, you should know that one of the options is either to succeed and become a very successful business that grows, or you close down the business because it's not growing, or because you're losing more than you're supposed to be. Keep that in mind at all times. But if your market demand is inadequate, you need to learn how to expand that demand. And if absolutely you cannot find a way out, again, you need to start having that conversation with yourself where you think about a way around this whole thing. The third one is just the regulatory environment you work in. So most healthcare innovations are heavily regulated. So when you have these regulatory constraints, they are very expensive. They are very difficult to navigate sometimes. So if you don't get them right in the first place, and you start getting a lot of fines and a lot of letters that are indicating that you are probably not very compliant with a lot of these regulations, then you actually spend more money trying to get yourself compliant than getting them in the beginning. So the first thing I want to say is that if you attempt to go into healthcare business in any form, remember that you need to get your businesses right. You need to get your regulatory stuff right. you need to get them right from beginning because they're less expensive then. But in the event that you don't get them right from beginning and you start violating some compliance issues and start getting these citations, it becomes more expensive. And the deeper you are in all this regulatory mess, the more money you're probably going to be spending. And then that is something else you need to pay attention to as a red flag, because then you are going to end up spending money that you probably never have, or you could have used to grow your business, into trying to be compliant with regulations. So the three things that I'm going to just spell out today is that when you have unsustainable operational costs where your expenses are just outpacing your revenue, that's your first red flag. Your second red flag is that when you have inadequate market demand for your product, you need to be very careful. You need to sit back and evaluate and see where your business is headed and whether it's sustainable. The third thing you need to pay attention to is that when you are in all this regulatory mess, which is expensive to stay compliant in the first place, but now you have to pay extra money to be compliant and pay fines and all those things, then that's the third red flag. But a lot of the time when these issues come up, I'm just going to really talk about two biases that really make it difficult. They cloud the recognition of these failures. And the first bias I would want to talk about is the escalation of commitment to a losing course of action. Now, because of the fear of failure and usually the emotional attachment that people have to the initial idea they use to start businesses, they go into this escalation of commitment. And what does that mean? It just means that you have an idea you think is so great that every red flag that I have mentioned, or every indicator of your business showing that the business is not doing well and it's not sustainable, is ignored, and you just keep putting in more and just keep escalating your commitment, just keep investing more because you are very hopeful that it will succeed. And the two reasons why people escalate commitment to any action that is very obviously not going to be successful is because of their fear of failure, and the second thing is just the emotional attachment. The emotional attachment is a very big component of it, and that's how our recognition of these red flags is clouded a lot of the time. So let's walk through the cycle of this. The first initially you make a decision, right? And it's always for every founder, the decision you make in the beginning is always a very brilliant idea. So that's the first stage of it. Now, if the results are positive or kind of positive in the beginning, you escalate that commitment because then it actually reinforces the fact that you have a really brilliant idea. So you keep investing more, you keep investing more time, more effort, more money, right? But then if it's negative, in the same way, you still want to escalate it, first of all, because of the concept of cognitive dissonance, right? So there's this tension between the decision the decision and the evidence you have. So you've made a decision to do this, to explore this idea, but then there's evidence that points to the fact that this is not sustainable, right? But you keep investing, isn't it? So that's where the cognitive. So even if it's that part where there's cognitive dissonance, there's a tension between your idea and how good you think it is and the evidence that you have. So then what happens? You increase your investment, you increase the investment of time, you increase your investment of effort, you increase your investment of money. And then the escalation depends some more. And the more money and the more time and the more effort you put into it trying to get it out, the more tunnel visioned you become, because then at that point your focus is solely on the initial decision and you become very resistant to changes, so you just keep going in that direction. So at that point it becomes difficult for anybody to get you back, because then you are so emotionally invested in the idea and the efforts and the financial commitment and time you put in it that you want to convince yourself that it's going to be successful. And a lot of the principle of loss aversion, where people just want to avoid losses, is what would really make them go deep into this, right? And then you get to a point of no return. Now, this is where your investment becomes so substantial that it becomes difficult for you to justify anything in this whole project. It becomes so, you've gotten to a point where you've put in so much into the business that you don't even know how to get yourself out of it. But then eventually the last point of this cycle is that you need to you fail, you still fail, but it will be a bigger failure, and you have to accept that failure. But at that point, the emotional trauma that comes with and the financial hit that you take at that point is really high. So again, when you have these red flags, you have these concepts that cloud it. And the second one I just quickly want to run through is the sunk cost fallacy. So you sink cost, you're already putting a lot of cost into it, right? So it's almost the same as escalating your commitment, but this time you're looking at how much you've already put into it, and that just keeps driving you into a point of where you want to really justify and rationalize every single decision and everything that will point to why you should continue going, because you've already put in so much money. So the whole idea about this is that in order to break something like this, you need to be able to have some level of self-awareness, and you need to be able to say, no, these are the objective metrics we have here. This is where I am in this cycle. And if I'm not aware of the stage of this cycle, like that I'm caught up in this cycle and I'm probably going to run through the whole cycle and stop yourself, you probably get to that point where you run the whole cycle and you come up with more losses and more emotional trauma from this whole experience. The other thing is to be able to see things objectively. And again, as I said, these emotional biases would usually cloud your judgment in that context, but you need to be able to have the tendency to see things objectively when the numbers don't align, when the idea is not picking up, when the market is not demanding your services or your product as much as you thought it would, when your expenses are off the roof and you're not making any money. You need to have that conversation with yourself and say, these numbers don't add up, and how long would I be able to go this way? And then catch your losses early. And so the two things I want to put out there on how you can really get out of this situation is, one, self-awareness. You need to be very aware of these biases and the tendency for you to escalate your commitment, as well as think that because you already sunk cost into these things, you just keep going. And then the second thing is that you need to be able to have the eye to look at things objectively. So keep in mind when you start or you are running your business, and make sure that whenever you have at every stage of a business, you are objectively evaluating where you are on the different items. And when you start picking up on some of these red flags, especially the three that I mentioned, and these are very common in healthcare, and they cause most healthcare companies to collapse, you need to sit back and have a conversation with yourself and make sure you are aware of these biases and the tendency for you to escalate your commitment, even though your action might be one that will not be so successful. So thank you so much. And this has been another exciting episode. I love being here. And again, please remember to subscribe, like, and share the content. And I'll see you in our next episode. Take care.